Well, that's awesome. You know, last time I said we were signed up to be. No, I'll do Florida. Yeah, but is anybody else working on it? You know, oh, not you were gonna have Robin is okay. She's sort of the technically on site. Organizer. I'm still, you know. So we'll see. Yeah, either she'll take me to her board and not. But we met this yesterday. So I think it's so bigger. Last night not until like yeah, and then go to be a reader or something like that. And I figured it's yeah, that was. Did it first church, right? Bill, they have one city, third for something. And then often, like nurse, we don't get open. So that's just gonna be like carry contracts. Just carry.
I appreciate everybody's patience. We're gonna get started in about 1 minute.
There's a guy, Jack Smith, is on the hearing him. So he's been there for a long time, but apparently it's not running again. That really surprised me. There are 16 minutes. We have so it's early yet. Yeah. That's something like that. We get out something. We're going to well, yeah, they should be happy to.
Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? Good.
Yes, I did. Yep, I'll bring you in. Hello.
Hey, Cap, how you doing? I'm doing all right.
Nice picture. Tasty. I know you did. How you doing? You doing good? Yeah. Looking great. Still with instant count?
Yeah, but, you know, I'm gonna be going out, you know, one day, going to the house.
And you can look. Good to see you. Believe it.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to our viewers that are participating online. My name is Hassan Mitchell, and I'm with NC Black Alliance, and I have the pleasure of serving as our Democracy and Economy Coordinator. And tonight, we'll be discussing all things redistricting, but specifically, we're going to have a deep dive into the proposed IRC, the Independent Redistricting Commission. Tonight's event, this Code Red programming is brought to you by North Carolina Black Alliance, but it's also in partnership with our partners at NC Counts, our partners at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and also our partners at Common Cause. And I'll introduce these folks, but they'll also feel free to introduce yourself and come up. But tonight, we do plan to have a deep dive into the Independent Redistricting Commission. I would ask, if you do have questions during the individual presentations, feel free to ask questions if you all like. If you want to save those questions for the end, that's fine. And for our online viewers, please save your questions and put them in the chat. And we'll be monitoring the chat as well to answer your questions. I do want to just begin by introducing our partners tonight. As I said, Code Red Redistricting Program. This is a partnership between North Carolina Black Alliance and Common Cause, Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and NC Counts. And so we do have our partners here tonight, Mr. Tyler Day, Mr. Kyle Brazil, Adrian Spoto, did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
I'm sorry. And also Rachel Allure. And so they will come to you all with some very important information tonight. If you do want to take a screenshot of everybody's contact information, I also want to introduce Attorney Nastasia Watkins, who is also with the North Carolina Black Alliance, and she works on our team as well. And so, once again, for those that are viewing online, if you do have questions, please put those questions in the chat. And then when we are done, I'll go back and take a look at the chat, and we'll field those questions at the end. So here's how tonight's going to look. This is your welcome. That was your introduction of the partners. We'll have an overview. I'll just give a brief overview of the session that we held in May. And then we'll go into some local community data presented by Kyle Brazil. And then we'll also talk about redistricting in your community, specifically the Nash Edgecombe area, and our partners at Southern Coalition for Social Justice will just give us an overview. And what we try to do is just really tie this national issue into just everyday things that happen in your community. And so we do want to just talk about redistricting in your community, specifically this Edgecombe area. And then Kyle will come back and give us just some tips and nuggets around public comment and public hearing 101. We want to educate the community on issues that do happen and how you should properly engage with government. And then finally, we're going to take a deep dive into the meat of the conversation tonight, which is the Independent Redistricting Commission. And so Kyle and Tyler will really tag team that issue and talk about what is an IRC, the North Carolina IRC bill and what it addresses, and then factors in our state to pass an Independent Redistricting Commission. And then finally, we'll talk about some legal cases. Our partners at Southern Coalition for Social Justice, Adrian and Rachel, will go over just some historical cases that have happened, and then the context and the legal landscape of where we are today. I know, folks, redistricting is a hot topic, considering what's going on nationally. And so hopefully tonight, you can walk away with some answers and walk away with further clarity. But specifically, the meat of our discussion tonight will be all things centered around the IRC, which is an independent redistricting commission. And so let's talk about really quickly the overview of the May session. And so the Code Red Redistricting Program, we relaunched this campaign. This is a statewide campaign brought to you by the North Carolina Black Alliance. We relaunched this campaign in May on the campus of North Carolina A&T State University, along with our partners. We had a very successful campaign and kickoff. And what that initial May session was a grounding session around gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, how districts are drawn, and how the census plays into how those districts are created here in North Carolina. And so the reason that we held it in Greensboro is because we really want to take this campaign to areas of the state that have been dramatically impacted by both racial gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, and just faulty maps. And so Greensboro, as you all know, several years ago, the campus was split and divided when the districts were drawn. And so we felt like that was an ideal place to really kick off this statewide campaign in the Triad. And so here we are in Rocky Mount as we move it further east. We're taking this information and taking this campaign to areas of the state that are most severely impacted by unfair maps. And so that's just an overview of May. It was an initial grounding session to really educate the community on the redistricting, how maps are created. And I will include for all the attendees online, those that are in the room tonight, we have given them just copies of the most recent maps that have been drawn. As you all know, there is a pending legal case where these maps could be redrawn. We don't know. And so I just wanted to provide some context for the folks in the room, but for our attendees online, I will also drop those in the chat and provide links to all of the content and material that I shared tonight. And so right now, we're just going to follow the agenda. I do want to bring up Mr. Powell, Brazil, and he will go over local community data.
Thank you, Hassani. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to our friends at the Black Alliance, and thank you to all of our partners here that were here tonight to talk a little bit about redistricting and centering community, right? So NC Counts Coalition, we of course are C3, and we believe in building a healthy, just, and equitable North Carolina through our cross-sector partners, right? And a portion of the way we do that is that we look for ways we can have systemic change. That's why the IRC is important to us and why we really think that it's a great solution for our communities. Now, in terms of these numbers, we center on community. And I know a lot of you all, we all center on community. It's about making sure those communities, they can come together, they can elect their candidates of choice, and that they're coming together to then have those issues that are mattering to them and, addressed through the folks that they elect. And so we know that we have redistricting, as Hassani said, and as we talked about in the last Code Red program. Before redistricting to start, we have to start first with the census. And the census gives us all the data that we, have in our community. Census gives us information about where our communities are and what it looks like. It also, of course, helps determine where funding is going to be split among communities. And also, census numbers tells us how many people we have in our state, right? So from census, we can then get to redistricting and know how many congressional seats we can hold and how those seats need to be broken up. And so in between the 2010 and 2020 timeframe, between the decennial census that's mandated in the Constitution, North Carolina grew a lot, and we are continuing to grow. We saw that growth in some key areas in North Carolina. We saw it in our urban communities, and we actually saw a loss in 51 counties that we would consider rural, right? And so we're seeing growth in a lot of different neighborhoods and a lot of different communities, in our urban communities and our communities of color, and a little bit of loss in some areas. But overall, we grew by almost 1 million folks. What did that mean for Rocky Mount? And what did that mean for our community that we're here today talking about, right? So we saw overall 1 million growth. You saw that in areas like Charlotte and the Triangle and in the Triad. In some of our more rural communities, we actually saw a decline in population. And so the change in race and ethnicity, as you all see there, 2% or so, which is relatively flat for Black alone, a slight decrease between the 2010 and 2020 census. We saw a large, much larger decrease among the white population in Rocky Mount. We saw a slight decrease, 5% decrease in the Native American indigenous folks, and we actually saw an increase, which is in keeping with overall trends, right, of Asian American populations and Latina populations, 21% increase. Those increases in communities of color and sort of that flat level in African American communities is a trend that we're seeing across the state.
So when you have wake up there, that's not correct, right? Am I just kind of showing me out?
I'm sorry, yes, that's not Wake. That's
Should
not.
that be Nash?
Hold on, we'll get to that. That's Rocky Mount. It's for
Oh, that's
Rocky
the
Mount.
city of Rocky Mount.
That's the city for Rocky Mount. Yeah. And these are all stats for the city of Rocky Mount. We're going to get to Nash in a second. Thank you for that. We'll get to Nash in a second. So for Rocky Mount, some other quick facts that we can pull from the census, right? Some information that I think is just helpful as you all plan and organize throughout your community. In Rocky Mount, we saw from census data and from information that we have from the ACS, a median household income is currently $52,000, around $53,000. Compare that to the North Carolina median income of about $70,000. We saw a median gross rent for Rocky Mount area of about $900 and compare that to $1,200. We saw home ownership in Rocky Mount around 47.5%, comparing that to 66.3% in North Carolina. And we also saw a higher poverty rate in Rocky Mount, in our community in Rocky Mount at 21% compared to overall North Carolina of about 12.8%. So the census data, is able to give us some key information on our communities, what our communities look like, and then in turn, as we elect our candidates of choice, what folks need to fight for us. And to your earlier question, I did want to get to Nash and Edgecombe. So we saw a population overall in the 2020 census for Nash, 94,000. This 2020 census population for Edgecombe at 48,900. And we see that breakdown by race, right? And so we see the differences there for Nash and Edgecombe. And so this is what our community looks like. And we center on community as we talk redistricting, right? Because we want these districts to reflect our communities. We want these districts to be drawn in a way that we can elect our candidates of choice. And so that's just a little bit about the data. You'll hear from me some more as we talk a bit about IRC and solutions and independent redistricting commission. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Adrian. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. Hey everyone, my name is Rachel Allure. I'm with Southern Coalition for Social Justice. I'm happy to be here and see some familiar faces in the crowd. So today I'm just going to be sharing a little bit, if you don't already know, about how redistricting impacts your community and basically just going through a very recent development for Edgecombe County school systems or the school system in Edgecombe County and the recent redistricting that happened there. So this is almost a case study of how communities can impact local redistricting. So a little bit of background on how Edgecombe County Public Schools was required to redistrict. So there was the demerger of the Nash Rocky Mount Public Schools that resulted in approximately 1,700 students and over 9,000 residents to be absorbed into Edgecombe County and then the Edgecombe County public school system. So along that line in Rocky Mount, the folks who were on the Edgecombe side would then get absorbed into the Edgecombe County public schools. And so with this large increase in population for the new school system, that changed the way that the districts had to be constructed, because when you have almost 10,000 people coming into this new school system, that sort of throws off the balance of the districts. So because of a court case and subsequent court cases, the district was required to redraw the school districts so that every person can have substantially an equal vote and so that their vote matters equally as the next person's. And so the process began when the school board, well, it began with the demerger, but after that process, when they realized they had to redistrict, they hired a map drawer to draw the maps. And when I say they, it was the Edgecombe County Board of Education. The community members started organizing. They started coming together as a community to figure out, how they wanted to approach this new challenge and make sure that the community's voices were heard. And so they used public comment, which we'll get to in a minute on how to really have an effective public comment and, put forward your interest, the community's interest in front of local boards and local elected officials. But community members really utilized the public comment section of the Board of Education's meetings during the drawing process. And the community reminded the board of its obligation to the community and put an emphasis on communities of interest. So that's communities that have historically been associated with one another, different neighborhoods who have a lot in common, that sort of thing. And because of all of their advocacy during the map drawing process, the board sought out the community's input in drawing some of the maps, one of them being a map solely focused on the communities of interest in Edgecombe County. So then the school board called for submissions from the public regarding these communities of interest. The community working group organized to poll folks from all across Edgecombe County and gather more information about those communities of interest, submitted those to the board in a letter, and the board then gave those communities of interest to the map drawer, and that's how we got one of the maps that the map drawer and the board's attorney presented to the school board. So those were three maps, maps A, B, and C initially. Maps D and D2 were later introduced later down the line in this process. And they were requested by certain members of the board to track county commissioner lines. So those county commissioner lines, the theory was keeping those districts similar to or as similar as possible to the county commissioner lines. That would help folks be able to figure out, okay, so I vote in District 1 for the county commissioners, and if I can translate that to the Board of Education vote, then that might make it easier for me to figure out what district I live in. The way that it actually played out, though, map D2 progressed all the way to the final stage along with map C. So there were two maps before that I'll speak to in a moment, but map D2 was changed even further at the request of certain members of the school board to mostly track their interests. And so at the end of the process, we ended up with map C, which prioritized those communities of interest that the working group and other members of the community worked so hard to submit, and then map D2. And the other two maps, one of them prioritized district compactness, which when we talk about all of these buzzwords, in the law, there are certain traditional redistricting principles that when you draw a map, they have to gather and consider all of those principles in drawing a map. One of them is compactness, so you don't want a crazy map that goes from one edge of the county to the other in a straight line or in a curvy line. You want to try to keep the districts as compact as possible. And then the other prioritize protecting incumbency. And so that means if you don't want to put, when you're redrawing a map, you don't want to put two folks who are already on the school board in the same district, thus forcing them to have to run against each other. So those were the other two maps. The board slowly throughout the process narrowed it down to two maps, map C and map D2. And so, the community working group and other community members have been working so hard throughout this whole process, but right here was when it started to really ramp up. And so the working group and community mobilized in support of map option C. They showed up and showed out at school board meetings, and there were a series of public hearings that were held as well. We had upwards of, I want to say, it was over 100 folks attend one of the public hearing meetings. That was really cool to hear about. And giving public comment at these meetings, attending regular meetings and the public hearings, like I said, holding community meetings and holding space and inviting folks and expanding the network so that more folks could learn about the working group, learn about what was going on in Edgecombe County with the redistricting. And yeah, so then we worked at SESJ, and myself worked with the community working group to analyze some of the other maps proposed as well. And during public comment, we had folks point out the shortcomings of those maps and how especially map D2 in the end would ultimately dilute Black voters' voting power. And so really it was amazing to see how the community mobilized around option C, and and also how the community navigated all the political dynamics throughout this whole process. It was very, very moving and very inspiring to see how the community did that. And then, of course, the outcome, as some of you might know, the outcome was that the Edgecombe County Board of Education unanimously adopted option C. And so it just really goes to show that this years-long development since the Nash-Edgecombe demerger happened and the years that have followed, how hard the community worked, it all came together. And, the community got and the board voted for the option that best represented what the community wanted and protected their voting rights. So it's really, really cool to see. And so the takeaways, I think here's a photo from after we found out that the board voted for option C. The takeaways are that redistricting does not just happen at the statewide level. Sometimes it's right in your backyard, and it also doesn't just happen after every 10-year census. So stuff can happen like the demerger, where new residents are being absorbed into your district or your county where redistricting is necessary. So it's not just an every 10-year occasion. And also that the problems with redistricting can be present at any level of government, at any level that it's done. So when you think of redistricting, it is a very buzzword, it's a very hot topic right now, but redistricting itself is not a bad word. Redistricting is required in order, like I talked about before, with the one person, one vote. It's required to make sure that everybody has a roughly equal vote when you're going to the polls. But there are so many problems that can come along with redistricting, and those are the problems that, SESJ and all of our partners work for. That's what the community was trying to avoid here, like gerrymandering, vote dilution, and other political considerations as well. So all of that being said, as many problems as there are, this Edgecombe County Board of Education redistricting just goes to show how important and crucial community involvement is, and that it does make an impact. Edgecombe County Public Schools and all the kids within there would not have gotten this win had it not been for the redistricting community working group and all of the community members who were involved in making that happen, and making their voices heard. So a lot's going on in the world right now, a lot's going on in our state and nationally in terms of redistricting, but it's important that we feel it, that we recognize that there's a lot going on, but at the same time remembering that we can share our voices, we can uplift and mobilize the community, and it's just a really great outcome. Still a lot of work to do, but a great case study for how community is so crucial in redistricting. So I am basically finished up, but we have two of our leaders of the community redistricting working group here, so I didn't know if y'all wanted to add anything or have any words.
I think you covered it.
Okay.
Well, unless people have some questions.
Yeah, happy to take questions, but otherwise,
A little bit picture.
I know, it's yours. All right, and so go ahead.
What's the significance of majority Black jurisdictions in redistricting? Because Edgecombe is majority Black. And if I'm not mistaken, so is the city of Rocky Mount.
Yeah, so when you have, you mean in districts
Population.
population? Yeah, so when you have a black voting age population, a majority black voting age population in a district, that enables the black community to elect a candidate of their choice. And so when districts are drawn in that way, and there's a little bit of nuance to that, if they're intentionally drawn that way in order to pack black voters into one district, or, for example, well, if that's a majority, they would be packed into one district, that could dilute their vote under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And that's what Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act aims to prevent, is the dilution of black votes and minority votes in general. And so if you have, however, if you're following the Voting Rights Act and you draw a black voting age population, a majority EVAP is what we call it, then that enables the black community to coalesce around their candidate of choice and ideally elect their candidate of choice.
A follow-up question. So what's the role of the white voters? Are they also protected by Section 2?
Yes, everybody is protected by Section 2. However, at least from SESJ's standpoint, we mobilize and we focus on, minority communities, historically marginalized communities.
And one thing we had to pay attention to in the Edgecombe County situation is not intentionally dilute white votes as well.
Absolutely.
Make sure that that wasn't an issue.
Absolutely.
As we tried to maximize what could be helpful for the black voters.
Right, absolutely, yeah, and that's definitely true. I think the aim of the Voting Rights Act itself is to put folks on an even playing field as much as is possible. So
I just wanted to mention in Nash County, there's also an issue around race. When black voters, it's about 40-some% black. I don't know the exact percentage black, but 42 or 44. I'm not sure. As you get up in the 40s, you run into another kind of racial problem, because whites have to work harder to keep their districts whiter, or as white as they can, to help, because in their mind that helps them elect candidates of choice. And I think there's even more pressure when it's partisan, because the partisan differences by race are, very clear cut. Yeah, they're very stark, and so county races are partisan. So we still have that. It is also a threshold where we begin to run into that packing problem, and having strategies. And we didn't have the opportunity in Nash to really organize around that as fully as we could, and to educate the community. So strategies on how to deal with that, packing, the dilution of it, so that we have more of a consensus in the black community to not do that, is important, because often it splits. The packing often is presumed to benefit one or two black, whoever is packed, to make their life maybe easier. But it also then means there are less black people in other districts to have influence.
Right.
So what do you recommend for that, or how do we pay attention or get ourselves prepared for that kind of work?
yeah, I think that's a great question. Off the cuff, I don't know that I have like a checklist of here's what you should do. However, I think it's important to just do what we did in the Edgecombe almost case study here, and keep an eye on the maps, keep an eye on, what your local officials and what your local government bodies, if there's redistricting on the table, just kind of keeping an eye on that. Because, Edgecombe, I think, was great in that they were very transparent with putting the shape files online, but putting pressure on if the whatever government body it is not sharing and being open with that information. putting the pressure on kind of taking this, what we did in Edgecombe as an example and showing up to meetings, just letting them know that the community is watching. I think is a great place to start at least. Any more questions? Well, thank you all so much, and I will hand it over to the next person.
Thank you, Ray. So before we bring Kyle back up, I just wanted to check the chat just to see if there were any pressing questions from the chat. I think there was a question: what can be done if Section 2 of the voting rights is dissolved? That may be a question for later. And then I know someone asked, how does this local information pertain to the IRC conversation? And just to, if I may, the whole purpose of us tying in the local information was to let folks know that redistricting is larger than national. There's school boards, there's county commissioners, there's city council, and so we because you might have missed that initial grounding session in Greensboro where we went over maps. I think someone in the comments wanted to see some maps. Where are the maps? But we did have an initial grounding where we went into maps in detail. And so the purpose of tonight's conversation is to really ground us in some local issues, but also we'll go into an in-depth discussion around the IRC. Yes.
I have a comment on that question.
Sure.
Okay. And that is, I'm thinking that to the extent local communities have experience and success with advocating for their elected officials in the redistricting process, having them give that up for a new process that they will have to then learn how to influence, if they can, depending on whether that's I presume that would still be the goal, and that's a no later discussion. I think it does create some challenge around having people understand this new process and how they would participate. That's all I want to add.
Yeah, I'll deal with that to the experts if they might answer that. But there's those are questions. I'll turn it over.
Yeah. I'm happy to start that. I know we're about to talk a little bit about public testimony, but I think that's a really good question. And so I just hear you speak, Rachel, and it's about fairness, right? I mean, and so the tools we want to make sure we equip the community with are those tools so that they can fight back, right? And to be clear, the C3 space, the enemy is the gerrymander, right? That's the enemy. It's packed and cracked communities, and as you said about the pack, you saw that district that snaked up from Charlotte almost to Durham. That was a guaranteed win for the incumbent, but those folks all have different things. The Independent Redistricting Commission, just to answer your question, we'll talk more about it in just a bit. It would be a new process, but a part of what we want to develop is making sure that it's funded, is making sure that there's education, and that we're taking. My grandfather was a poultry farmer, so the foxes are in the hen house, right? So we're taking the fox out of the hen house with legislature having full authority to redistrict as they see and put it in the hands of the people, in the hands of the citizens of the state, so they can then make those decisions. And so making sure we have a fair, transparent process, that's all of that. And we'll get into more of that in a second. I'm saying all of that now. But it's a full process to make sure that folks are educated about it. So it's a great question.
So just that person made the point of what's the connection.
Yes.
And I think the connection is people will then wonder, if I had success with what I would have my elected officials do this, or felt satisfied that I had been able to speak up for myself as much as I could, how would that translate to this? That would be the connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I think it's even just not a step further, it's a step in combination of what you just said. 89% of North Carolinians, from a poll from a few years ago, are tired of gerrymandering. And so, if folks are able to gerrymander because they have a friend and they want their friend to make sure they win and keep the incumbent in power, they're picking their voters. The voters aren't picking their representatives, and that's backwards. So there's a few ways that we want to articulate and talk about. How do we fight back? What do we have to do to make sure we speak up? And we saw this way already here, and it was successful. So I'm going to go through that for the folks who are here and the folks who are online. But I also want to say, of course, the other tools, get the data. I started talking about census data. Make sure you have that information. That's going to tell you about your community, right? And so there is so much data. You can run it into ChatGPT now, and it tells you some answers, right? The Census Bureau has a ton of information, and it will tell you this is the percentage of such and such in your community. This is what your community looks like. We also have a tool I just want to plug. If folks online and here want to look at the maps, there's this really great tool called Redistricting in You. It's still live. You can go online right now and look at your districts, and you can play with, there's a little toolbar. You can go back and forth to look at how it's changed. You can also look at race, and you can also look at folks who voted in the Biden-Trump presidency just to see how things are split and how you just see the lines for yourself, the gerrymander. So those are some of the ways that you can fight that. Getting educated and learning about these topics. Of course, you got to vote, right? We all got to vote. So make sure you do that. The other thing we have to make sure we do is that we continue to speak up. Civic engagement isn't just about voting at these elections. We have to constantly engage to try to preserve this fragile democracy that we have. And so we believe legislation and policy really is decided by the folks who show up. When there's a public, an opportunity for a public commentary, right? It could be about a budget item, or it could be something about redistricting at the legislature. Showing up gives your voice, gives your community a voice. It makes sure that they know they're being watched, and I'll talk about that in my experience in that. It gets you some attention as well, so make sure you're posting and all of that to Instagram and whatnot. It also gets media attention. And one of the things that I remember fondly is when we got together, and we were in, where were we? We were in the western part of the state for a public hearing around redistricting. I think we were in Boone, perhaps. And we got a lot of people there, right? It was folks from communities from all across the state. And at that time, they were only doing 3. So there weren't a lot of opportunities. I remember one of the legislators leaned over and I heard him say, where did all these people come from, right? Like, that's the question. No one cared about redistricting in the last cycle. You know, this is about the 5th time they've done it in a decade. But they notice, and they know that people are watching. And so before you provide your testimony, you know, strongly encourage you, especially everything's on YouTube now. So you can go and you can find, you know, city council meeting for your place, that county commissioner for that place. Usually everything's online. And you can just get a sense of the flow of things and also get a sense of sort of what people are talking about and how they're dressing. So watch, attend. If you can't do it in person, go on YouTube. Oftentimes you have to sign up for this. And so make sure you sign up. I'm going to put this over here so we can see this. You want to make sure you read up about the topic. I'm messing this up, Asani. I'm so sorry. Yes. Okay. You want to read on the topic. Make sure you gather the information on the topic. If there's any rules that you have to learn, right? There might be a length. There may be certain things that you can or can't say or process to submit a written version. Make sure you learn about those rules. Make sure you get those details. That's really important. That's probably the second most important thing. And then when you get those details, make sure you have some community with you to share those details. So for an example, I remember early on the very first redistricting process, they posted where the public hearings would be at a community college in the West. And it actually was in a building that was about 2 miles away from the community college. That was 2 miles away that belonged to the community college, but it wasn't actually on campus, right? So you get the details, and then as you get it, make sure you share out. And I think the most important thing is to practice, right? You'll get 2 or 3 minutes. Back in the day, you know, folks in my mom's generation, you know, you all would have, if it only got 2 minutes, one person would say the first few paragraphs, the next person would say the next paragraph. There's different ways you can do this. If you're doing it with a group, you can do it that way. But make sure you practice regardless. And then, of course, submit that written testimony when applicable, okay? One of the important reasons why you want to do all this, and it goes back to what Rachel was saying earlier, right? This is all creating a record. This is a record that's important. It's a record so that SCSJ and the good folks who litigate will say, you know what, they spoke up, so let's talk to them. Maybe they're a good land because these are racially gerrymandered maps. The judge will have a record. 50 people commented that this is their community and you split it, and no one said otherwise. Why did you split it, right? So this is creating a record, and it's really important for that. Effective testimony, just really quickly, you want to make sure you address the chairperson and the members of the committee. You want to tell them who you are in the organization if you represent an organization. You want to talk about if it's community focused, talk about your community, whatever issue it is that's impacting your community. Make sure you're bridging that gap between the issue and how it's impacting you. And share out, of course, this was written more so for redistricting, but if it is redistricting, you want to make sure you share out what your community of interest is. Usually you have 3, maybe 4 minutes, so it has to be succinct and concise. Don't become the lawyer with the closing statement, right? You want to make sure it's succinct. It's no disrespect to the great lawyers, but make sure, and I'm a recovering one, make sure you are succinct and you share that, in a quick way. The last component, which I think is the portion that elevates a lot of the comments that I've listened to, it's about the personal story, right? So if you have a child in school and they're being impacted by these changes, or if you, you imagine all the stuff that the legislature has been passing, if you have someone who's directly impacted in your household or you're directly impacted by these issues, make sure you make it personal. Make sure you tell what's going on. And of course, you always thank the committee for your time. Avoid jargon, stick with your story. Talk about facts. If you don't have a personal connection, make sure you talk facts. Be present at the hearing, all right? Try not to read, and then of course always take the pic on social media so you can elevate it for yourself, and that's what we do this day, all right? And then there's more, you all have more information about the local stuff than I do, so I'm not even going to pretend to have all the lists of all the folks locally in Rocky Mount. But you all know, one of the things that you have to do, you have to learn who you're talking to. You have to know when are they meet. You have to gather all of that information. And so this is just for the state reps and the state senators. But there is, every body has a different sequence of how often they meet, when they have public hearings. Perhaps they have a closed door session. For some weird reason, sometimes they do. But you have to make sure you have those meetings and opportunities to engage and that you know when those regular sessions are. And elevate that to our community so that other people can see this civic engagement 365 and really get engaged in the work, all right? So that's a little bit about public testimony, making sure you're speaking up, okay? I want to share about the redistricting process in North Carolina, and we're going to start moving to more solutions. So one solution, get armed with the data, know the data. Another solution is to sue, of course, or to show up at the legislation and make sure you provide that information. Over the last few years, NC Counts has been a partner and a member with other organizations in the coalition, pulling together work around what we call an independent redistricting commission, right? This isn't a new thing. What is actually novel is the way we do redistricting in our state, right? We're one of the few states where the legislature has all the control and the governor doesn't have a veto. Most states, the governor has a veto. There's some states out there that also have an independent redistricting commission. And I'm thinking California and Virginia and Michigan, they have a process like that, right? And so currently in North Carolina, one of the reasons why gerrymandering is such an issue. And I'm saying one of the reasons because we know we've got issues with the Voting Rights Act being chipped away at session after session, right? There's a lot of issues. But one of the reasons why we have gerrymandering in North Carolina is because the legislature, the foxes are guarding the hen house, right? They are doing it. And so North Carolina, the redistricting committee, they have full authority. And my friend Tyler Day says it best, I'm stealing from him. It's not just that the legislature has authority with no governor veto. It's actually the leaders of the Senate and the House who have the authority, right? It's the political leaders who are doing it and everyone else falls in line. It's not even as though you have an entire body doing it. You have leaders who are doing it and then everyone is falling in line. And so the committee and the chair with their aides and consultants, they're drawing the maps. It's supposed to be transparent. They often go behind closed doors to do it. The maps are drawn as the chair wants and the politicians approve them. In our redistricting world, if we were to have an independent redistricting commission, that would shift. And so we would have a makeup, and this is the model we've come together with in community and with a lot of folks talking through what we would want to see. A 15-person independent citizens commission. It would be made up of 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 unaffiliated or other parties, so Green Party or undecided, unaffiliated voter, third-party voter. The commission would have to follow strict criteria, but even before you get to the criteria, those commissioners would be selected based off of ethics and a review, right? So this isn't an instance where the former chair of the, and the lawyer of the party then becomes a commissioner. These are citizens and people of community who are deciding to apply and become commissioners. They would have to follow strict criteria to draw those maps, and they would also have to have a fully transparent and fair process, open to the public, with a report at the end of it, right? And so we would be able to come, people would be able to come and provide public testimony, and then they would have to draft a report that said, this is how we looked at this testimony, or this one testimony is inconsistent with these 300 people, so we did not consider that, right? But some kind of report to keep it honest and make it fair. And then they would approve the maps, and there's a lot of language in there as well. What happens as a backup, making sure we advertise for the commissions, all of that is thought through. And so we're really proud of it as a way to end gerrymandering in North Carolina. And Tyler, I'm going to pass it over to you, but I see a hand. Do you want to take quick questions and then get to yours? Come up and tell me quick questions, Tyler, because you know more than I do about this. I see Judith has raised her hand. Do you have any questions?
While y'all were finding that,
Please.
one of my questions is, how are you proposing that these people be selected? And how are they selected? How many other states do this, and what are the variety of ways that these commissions are selected?
Absolutely. So just to start with the background of that, as we were beginning to meet on this, we talked to commissioners as well as folks from California who did this. Common Cause California, they were the instrumental out there for this work. We talked to folks in Michigan, Ohio. We also talked to the Virginia folks. And one of the things that we actually heard from the people in Virginia was that they knew where they wanted to be. And so they were here and they said, well, they'll never push us there, so let's start here. And they sort of started negotiating against themselves from the beginning, right? So they said, don't do that. Like, put what you want in your memo, put what you want in your communications. For the selection, it would be the Human Relations Commission and
The state ethics.
the State Ethics Commission, right?
Yes.
And so they would work together. It would be advertised throughout the state, as well as advertisement in indigenous communities as well, right? Throughout the state and to all communities. And Tyler, you want to say more about?
Sure.
And how are they selected, though?
On the state ethics commission, it's a bipartisan commission, and it's made up of equal number of Republicans and Democrats. I would have to look back to tell you. I can't say off the top of my head exactly how they're selected. Like, if you go to their website, you can see that. Yeah, but it is required that it is bipartisan and that there isn't a majority of one party or the other. But we'll talk a little bit more about the selection process as well. But I did just want to highlight, these are the bills. House Bill 20 and Senate Bill 638, the Fair Maps Act, as well as Senate Bill 698, the Fair District Stronger Democracy Act, which a lot of us in coalition worked on. Both of these bills are independent redistricting commission bills that, if enacted, would do everything that Kyle said. You probably can't see there, but when you get the slides, you'll be able to see some of the sponsors of those bills. So really, stressing these are citizens, not politicians. There are a lot of people that would be prohibited from serving on the commission. This includes lobbyists, legislative liaisons, staff or counsel to the General Assembly, political party officials or consultants. You can't be head of a political party or working with a political party. You can't be serving, as the new executive director of the State Board of Elections was, as counsel to the General Assembly staff. This is designed to prevent conflicts of interest, because the whole way that our lines are drawn down is a great big conflict of interest. And we would have 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 5 voters not affiliated with either of the 2 major political parties. We intentionally wanted an odd number. And that's one of the other things that we learned from Virginia, is that when they had their commission, they had an even number, that led to deadlock. And if you can't, if you have deadlock, you can't get anything done. So you need an odd number to make sure you're able to pass something. This also requires that you have members of each of these groups that approve of the decision. So you can't, just have a map that's just approved by the Democrats or the Republicans, or even just the Democrats and the Republicans. You would need help from the voters not affiliated with either 2 major political parties. And that's written into the language that you would need votes from each of those groups. And then, as Kyle had mentioned, through the process, there would be a lot of advertising to get the word out. I know included in the bill 698, we included money for mailings so that people would be mailed information about this. I think a random number of people. And this is based upon something that they did in Michigan. They actually mailed out applications in order to help in advertising the process. But again, the bipartisan State Ethics Commission would review these applications and help to narrow them down. There would also be a process by which members, state legislative leaders in the General Assembly could strike down members. This is something that we took from California's commission, where that helps to ensure that, if someone who's gotten through the process, that, one of the legislative leaders believes, this is a partisan, then they have the ability to strike down some of those members. So all throughout the process, we're trying to narrow it down to people that care about this, that care about redistricting, and don't have conflicts of interest. The other thing here is that, once they're selected, they would be bound to go by this criteria. And that includes a prohibition on partisan gerrymandering. So that would be illegal. Racial gerrymandering is already illegal. Now, it is up to our federal courts to enforce that. I know we have a current case going on challenging our districts as racial gerrymanders, and we hope that the federal courts will rule on our side. But there will be a ban on partisan gerrymandering through this. There will also be a ban on drawing districts for incumbent protection or favoring incumbents. And we've seen this not just with the state legislature, but even at the local level, where legislators and commissioners or city council members will write into the language that, oh, we want the districts to remain in the same general geographic area as they were before. And this, there's an argument, well, that may be helpful to people because they've lived in that district before, they'll recognize it, but it also can be read as an attempt to basically keep incumbents, make sure that they're safe. Basically, saying, well, we know John has been here for 20 years in this seat, we want to make sure that he's taken care of. And that's not what we want, through our process. This is all about the voters, because these districts belong to us, not politicians in power. Compliance with the Voting Rights Act is already required. It is not always followed, but it is required. And respect for communities of interest. And this is a big one. So, currently, again, as Kyle said, the legislature can do whatever it wants. And I remember in 2022, when they were redrawing the line, or 2021, I should say, they had criteria that said that they may review communities of interest. They may look at that. They may look at municipalities. Well, I may, decide to eat, some Chick-fil-A, or maybe I won't before I leave. I don't know. When you say that you may do something, that has no force behind it. It's essentially nothing. You have to say you shall do it and put that into the criteria. And even still, legislators in 2021 did not follow their own criteria when they said that they shall not use partisan data. We know that they used partisan either that or they had it all in their heads when they do partisan gerrymander districts in 2021. So that were ruled by the court to be pro-Republican partisan gerrymanders. So respecting communities of interest is really important, and making sure that when people in a community tell you, like in the Triad, you want a district that is respected, and that the commissioners adhere to what people have asked. And then equal population, that's already a requirement, of course, in order to make sure that everyone's vote counts equally. And then having contiguous districts, so that, that's already a requirement. Yeah, districts have to be connected. And as Kyle said, another thing I really love about this is having a written evaluation where the commission would have to explain how they follow the criteria and the impact of the plan on minority groups. And they have to write that out and explain to us, how they did that. So I think this is much more robust than anything that the General Assembly has done. And even still, again, the General Assembly has put forth criteria that they have not even followed. So public participation. During the last redistricting in 2023, we had three public hearings for a state of now I believe over 11 million people, and I don't even know how many square miles. I mean, it's quite a large state to go from all the way in the mountains to down at the Outer Banks. So, they had a hearing in Hickory, they had one in Raleigh, and then one in Elizabeth City. Not one to try it, by the way, and not one in Charlotte. Two areas that were, I think, pretty heavily targeted by the congressional mess. Not one in the Sand Hills either. Another area that's for a congressional district. Both of the bills that have been introduced, 698 and House Bill 20, would require at least 20 public hearings and hearings before and after maps are drawn. That's another thing. The hearings last time were held before the maps were drawn, before we even had an opportunity to know, they should be held before the maps are drawn. That's fine. But after, we see what has been done, the public needs an opportunity to say, yeah, you got it right, or no, you didn't. And so, in 2023, we had no public hearings after the maps were drawn. This would also require hearings in metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. And what this really means is that you would have to have diversity in the hearings so that you're holding hearings in big cities like Raleigh, Charlotte, and you're also holding hearings in smaller towns and locations geographically dispersed throughout the state. Having a way to provide public comment, whether that is in person, at hearing, online, or via mail. Having public access to mapping software and census data so that the public is able to create their own maps if they want to, including community of interest maps. And then I really love this, having a dedicated redistricting website that explains the process to people, because if you go to the General Assembly's redistricting page, yes, there's a, brief explanation, and they do have, I will credit them for having many of our past maps up there, so you can see the record of how bad it has been for decades. But there is not really a explanation of what this is that we're doing and why it's important and why we need people to be involved. So, it'd be great for our state government to provide that. You have a question?
Oh, yes, I did, regarding the public participation and transparency for these, proposed hearings and whatnot. My first question would be regarding what would the social media outreach look like regarding these hearings? Because one thing that I hear a lot with what I do is that, I didn't hear about this type of thing or that type of thing because I didn't see it on social media or I didn't read about it in a newspaper. If we were to go this route, what would the social media outreach look like, as well as how we market not just the information that you provided, but any upcoming hearings that might be vital for the public to know?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know in the past, the General Assembly has provided little notice for hearings, and as Kyle said, has had hearings in locations where it was not clear exactly, is this the community college or is this the building, the annex that is, up the street? So I don't know that specifics on advertising those events are included in the bill. But we would definitely want to make sure that that's something that the commission, I believe, would have to determine. But that's definitely something that we would want to make sure happens, that it is advertised and done so broadly, whether that be on social media and through public notices. So definitely, that's really important. Yes, so I was saying about the redistricting website, So yeah, background on the redistricting process, live streams of the commission meetings, minutes from the meetings, public comments, and then, being able to see those proposed redistricting plans. So challenges for passing an IRC. One of the things that's difficult in North Carolina is that we don't have citizen initiatives. And what that means is that we don't have the ability to collect petition signatures and get legislation on the ballot for people to vote on directly. It's a form of direct democracy. So instead of having representatives who propose legislation and vote on it, citizen initiatives provide the legislation essentially directly to the people. And this is how they were able to get independent commissions in other states like Michigan. And I would tell you, if we had citizen initiatives, I have no doubt that we would be able to collect enough petition signatures, get it on the ballot, and get it passed. Because North Carolinians, everywhere I have gone and talked about this issue, when people understand what it is, they don't like it. And that's Republicans, Democrats, and people not affiliated with either of the parties. So that is a challenge. Any reform has to go through the state legislature. So legislators, and I think it goes without saying, with power, could be all right with how the system is. I mean, it's getting me elected. Why do I need to change it, right? So I often like to call legislators single-minded seekers of re-election. That's actually from my from a political science class I took in college, and it is actually not learning about this. But it is in their interest to get reelected. And I wanted to bring up, I was reading a great article from Carolina Public Press, which I would highly recommend if you haven't read them before. But in June of 1993, there's a Democratic senator named Clark Plexico. He filed a bill that would have removed the ability for legislators to draw districts. This is in 1993 when the Democrats were in charge. And he was basically rejected. His party at the time said, "Are you crazy?" They thought he was out of his mind. And he did politics and being in elective office as public service. So I thought I was there to do the right thing, which meant what's the best thing for the majority of people. Well, that is what is supposed to happen. But again, we have a conflict of interest for trying to stay in power. That's often not what happens. But I point that out to say that Democrats were in charge, and they chose to keep the system the way it was. And back in 2009, the bill that you see there, the Ham-Horton Independent Redistricting Commission bill, was introduced by none other than the current Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger. That's right. Senator Berger at the time was in the minority and was a supporter of redistricting reform. Why? Because he was in the minority. Mm-hmm. Now the tables have turned, and what has changed is that the parties that are in power have changed. And I like to call it a game of musical chairs, basically. That is, the party that is in power says, "Oh, the system's fine. We don't need to do anything." That was the Democrats for many years. They had power for over a century in the state and the General Assembly. Couldn't believe it. They lost power in 2011, and now Republicans have power and want to hold on to it in the same way. So, what I'm saying there is that we cannot trust political parties I think very clearly, they have shown, that they can't be trusted. They have the ability to draw fair districts, but, I don't think that they can be trusted. And, there are not a lot of things that Presidents Lincoln and Obama may agree upon, I think ideologically, but this is one of them.
I think that this is a great conflict of interest. To ask men holding office, elected from districts, to change the lines of that district to fit the new population. I think gerrymandering is the basis of what takes place.
I think we've got to end the practice of drawing our congressional districts so that politicians can pick their voters and not the other way around. What a bipartisan group doing?
A bipartisan group do it. So, what can you do to push redistricting reform? One of the things that you can do is to organize a district meeting with your legislators. Now, this includes state legislators, because remember, it's the state legislators that have the power to draw our voting districts. The folks that we elect to Washington don't have that power. So you want to meet with your state legislators, and they have the power to be able to create legislation for independent commission in North Carolina. Now, at the national level, you can talk to your congressional representatives about a national bill. And there was a bill a few years ago, the Freedom to Vote Act, that had provisions in it that would have banned partisan gerrymandering nationwide. So you want to talk to your state representatives about North Carolina, and the IRC in North Carolina, and national representatives about banning gerrymandering nationwide.
But Charlie, earlier the comment was made that these representatives are really playing follow the leader. They're just going to follow the leaders of the particular chambers. So would that do any good?
That's a great question. I think that, we are in this situation that we're in. It's a difficult situation. I'm not going to pretend to tell you that it's not. But I think that if there is enough public support, then it is possible to see legislators go against, to actually change things. And I say that because I've seen it. I've seen it, and I think we've all seen it recently. We've seen efforts recently to go after voter fraud, to go after non-citizen voting, of which is exceedingly rare. It came from a groundswell of support and people, just upset about it. And I think that we have to be that upset about this, because this is actual voter fraud, folks. These are legislators rigging the game for themselves. That's what it is. So I think we have to we have to continue, and I would say one of the things on here is spread the word about this. This is actually a rare issue, I think, that actually cuts across party lines. You can talk to your friends of the other party, whichever party you belong to, and about this, and I think that they're probably going to agree, unless one of your friends is the current legislator. But so yeah, that's one of the things. Writing the letters to the editor is a great thing to get in local newspaper. You can go to peopleoverpoliticiansinc.org. That's a website that from a coalition of different organizations, PNC Counts, Common Cause, and many others, promoting an independent judicial commission. You can advocate for reform at the local level. And Rachel talked before about the process here in Rocky Mount. And I do want to mention another anecdote. In Greensboro, they actually had an advisory commission this past redistricting cycle And I'm not aware of any other city in the state having such a commission, but they actually outsource the process for drawing their districts to this advisory commission. And the city council gave that up. Now, I say an advisory commission because ultimately the city council did not want to give up having the authority to decide on the final maps. They asked the advisory commission to present 3 maps to them, and they did not pick the advisory commission's first choice. However, it is still, I think, an improvement because they were not directly involved in the map drawing process. And so that's a step in the right direction.
I wanted to just go back to, I think, to me, one of the things involved in getting a groundswell of support for the independent commission goes back to the issue of how it will be selected. So even in the idea of the Human Relations Commission and the Ethics Board, they are both creatures of the legislature, of statute, state statute. So just like they change for the Board of Elections, you know, a Republican majority or a Democratic majority or whoever, some kind of majority coalition could change the makeup of either of those. It has appointments by the governor and the General Assembly in both those boards, but not at the same boards. It's the 8-8 or some equal number, but in the Human Relations, it's not equal. And the governor and the General Assembly can be of the same, could be majorities, you know, could be predominated by the same party. It could happen. So I think that more work is going to have to be done. I don't have an answer. And I think that's, to me, that is one of the most difficult pieces of deciding whether it would be better, you know, whether I would want to go all in for a commission versus.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you, and I will tell you that when we were drafting Senate Bill 698, that was one of the most, I think, difficult aspects is how you get that commissioner selection right. And, you know, what I would tell you is there is no perfect process. You know, no matter how we do it, someone has to make those decisions. But what I would say is, you know, I would rather have the State Ethics Commission be it bipartisan, you know, having a body that is not the body that is actually running in the districts. I mean, right now, right now we have legislation. I mean, it is like having students creating their own tests. And
well, how do the other states select their commission?
So we pulled, actually a lot of what we pulled from in terms of our system was from California and Michigan. So I know in California, they have a process where it's the state auditor's office that reviews the commission. I think they have a panel that's from within the state auditor's office. We had talked about that as well. The state auditor had its position has become a political football recently, so we thought it probably better to go away from that, given how the situation there. But they have a panel, and one of the things that they do, I really do like the application process that they have because they do have a panel, and in this case would be the Ethics Commission, and you would have to send in, an application that explains why you want to be on the commission. Just, like you were interviewing for a job, and I know that they even had direct interviews with some of the commission members once it had been narrowed down. So they also in California have that strike down provision that I had mentioned before, where legislative leaders from both parties have an equal opportunity to strike down individuals, which I think is a nice thing to help make sure that you don't have people that are super partisan on there. And it also gives us a chance to say, hey, you still get a say to be able to strike down people, within the process.
Is there any provision for geographic distribution of the people that serve on that commission? You don't have to.
I believe, I would have to look back to tell you, but I believe that we included a geographic provision in there. But yeah, I'm
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was in our memo. I don't know if it made it to the bill, because you know, what you do doesn't
Right.
always make it over what
Gotcha.
they want, but I know we had
Yeah.
it in there.
Okay.
So yeah, but I would say, any bipartisan commission, I think, that is not, skewed toward one party or the other, is gonna be better than what you have now. I mean, and right now, as Kyle said, even the governor doesn't even have a veto power. So there's nothing. There's no, the only check we have are the courts. And, to be honest with you, the courts have let us down, in 2022, or 2023, when they said partisan gerrymandering can go forth in North Carolina. And on that point, even beyond this, reform for, any commission, your vote for president, Senate, and state courts matters. And it matters a lot. The president obviously appoints Supreme Court justices to the U.S. Supreme Court and federal district court judges who hear on all sorts of cases, including redistricting cases, of which there's one right now, again, in federal court. The Senate obviously approves the president's nominations. And then, we've got a Senate race coming up next year, I should say. And then the state courts. State courts in 2022, the North Carolina Supreme Court said partisan gerrymandering is legal. We had elections in 2022. The makeup of the Supreme Court changed. The Supreme Court decided in an unprecedented decision to rehear that case from 2022. And then they said, it's okay. Partisan gerrymandering is all right to move forward. So, that was a direct result of those elections. And so, we do have power as voters to impact this process. And I just want to stress, especially in North Carolina, which is one of the most hotly contested battleground states in the country, we have a lot of power. I mean, we had a state court, a Supreme Court race decided by 734 votes last year. In 2020, we had a state Supreme Court race decided by 401 votes. So, your vote matters, and your votes for those positions can have a big impact on the courts.
In these other states that have adopted commissions, what is the amount of time that advocacy had to go on for them to get the bill adopted? And is there any litigation against any of these commissions?
Now, that's a good question. I do not know all the history of how long it took them in California to get that commission. And I know in Michigan, like I said, they had citizen initiative in Michigan, so they collected petition signatures, they got it on the ballot, I believe it was just a few years that took. I think something like 2 or 3 years or so. But Kyle,
Well, I would just add, I'm not sure the timing. I know for California as well, the ballot initiative, which we don't have in North Carolina. But I think your question is really important, because for all of this reform work, the thing that we want to see, it's not just that we need to push it and then get to the point where it's on the ballot eventually. You have to implement it. And so all of those pieces absolutely come into play. We have to consider all of that.
Just play for the long ball.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. And, it may take a while, but, I think one thing that I have learned is that, change often takes time. And, I think that you're building the foundation of hopefully something that will come to fruition. And we never know when those stars will align politically. So we want to be prepared. So yeah, you can spread word about redistricting reform in your community. You can contact me or Kyle if you have further questions. And you know, we often do presentations as well. So certainly reach out to us. And I believe I am over time. So,
I got two things before you go. One, did not the NAACP do something with redistricting last year?
yes.
Okay, and that's still out there now, right? They haven't ruled on it, right?
Yes, the NAACP and Common Cause, as well as many individual plaintiffs, sued the General Assembly over the maps from 2023, the maps you see on your tables here, claiming that they are racial gerrymanders. And that case was heard in federal court in Winston-Salem just this last June and July. It is currently being reviewed by the 3-judge panel, and we're waiting to hear what they will say.
Yeah, I was supposed to be a part of it, but my dad was sick, so I didn't. I told him I had to get somebody else, but I kept getting a call from the lawyer. And then the other thing, you're talking about media. Don't you all keep up with what goes on in the legislature as they do bills? Somebody's always there. Okay, talking about media. Getting back to the question that she asked. I think it would be good if you go to counties. When you go to counties, make sure you find out who's got a good media outlet as far as social media, so they can get it out in those communities. I think it would be good. You all have a list of folks that you can rely on. Make sure you get it to them so they can get it out in the community, because they'll rely on somebody like Cyclone Media and stuff. And just like myself, I got 95 people looking there. I don't know if they still own, but they have signed on. So, I mean, I think it would be good to find out the people in those counties that got a good social media list. And I cover 23 counties with the Eastern North Carolina Civic Group with my secretary over here.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. Definitely. I mean, we want to publicize this as widely as possible. So, but yeah, I'll just say, to wrap it up, right now it's politicians choosing their voters. It's all about citizens being able to be in control of the process, and a reminder that these are our voting districts. They don't belong to the politicians in power. I'll turn it over.
Hi all, I'm Adrienne from Southern Coalition for Social Justice. If you would go tonight and talk a little bit more about the legal background when it comes to independent redistricting commissions.
And I'm Rachel. I'll be joining for just a few slides, and then I'll pass it over to Adrienne. So yeah, just talking about, the legal background, where we bring ourselves as the law as it stands. State independent redistricting commissions are constitutional. We've got a couple of cases here, and this goes really well with what Tyler was just saying. The Arizona State Legislature case, I pulled this quote because I think it's really important and impactful. Both parts of the elections clause are in line with the fundamental premise that all political power flows from the people. So that's what the U.S. Supreme Court has said. Another case coming out of the Sixth Circuit, for example, this is when Michigan enacted its independent redistricting commission. They had a voter referendum. Unfortunately, as my colleagues were saying, North Carolina doesn't have a citizen initiative to be able to put something like that on the ballot. However, Michigan did, and the Sixth Circuit upheld that the state's basically ability to put that into place because of all the case law that exists for it. And this goes, Angela, back to your question about other states with IRCs. 22 states have used some sort of commission at some point in drawing either its congressional maps, its state legislative maps, or maybe both. I'm not going to try to rattle off all of those acronyms because I am not very good at doing that, but there's 22 of those states there. Now, when you think about an independent redistricting commission and the one that's proposed in North Carolina, we think about, is it truly independent? Is it truly, is it binding authority that the legislatures have to listen to in order to, select a map? And in those 22 states, only some of them are. And sometimes, for example, like in the city of Greensboro with the advisory commission and the advisory committee, some of those commissions might be implemented just to serve that advisory role. They might not be truly independent. But the states of those states in 2022, Arizona, California, Colorado, and Michigan had their maps drawn and implemented by what we think of when we think of an independent redistricting commission. And I'll turn it over to Adrienne for the rest of the presentation.
So in addition to the sorts of cases that Rachel already talked about that are just challenging the idea of having an independent redistricting commission in the first place, there can also be a lot of issues that come up just depending on like how the commission is structured and how it's set up, what rules are binding it. So those are the kinds of things we're going to talk about a little bit more. So the big one that's already come up a lot is authority. Does what the commission says go? Or does somebody else have a chance in the process at some point to step in and say, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do our own thing? So there's lists on the slide of states that have these binding commissions, and there's also some examples of some like New York, Virginia, Iowa, where they don't have that sort of binding authority. So if you have a binding commission, you're going to have a stronger check on partisan gerrymandering and other bad behavior that might happen during the process. There are some states that have had success with advisory commissions, like advisory commissions can do some good. For example, in Iowa, the legislature always goes with what the advisory commission says. Here in North Carolina, given what the legislature has already done with redistricting, seems pretty unlikely that the current legislature would adhere to the plans of a truly nonpartisan redistricting commission. So that is part of why all of these bills are proposing a commission that has full binding authority for North Carolina. Another thing that's come up is membership. Who's on the commission? You can have commissions that are primarily made up of ordinary citizens. Some examples of that, California, Colorado, and Michigan. On the other hand, you could have a commission that is entirely or partially made up of politicians themselves or political appointees. So in New York, each of the 4 legislative leaders will appoint 2 members to their commission, and then all of those people who were appointed get to choose 2 additional members. In Ohio, in addition to several members appointed by the legislative leadership, there's also elected officials themselves who are on the commission. The governor, the auditor, the secretary of state. And also, as a side note, that commission only kicks in if the legislature fails to pass them out. Obviously less helpful than something like what's being proposed in North Carolina, where the commission is in charge in the first place. So obviously, if a commission is made up of political appointees, politicians themselves, they're going to have a lot more side interests of their own that might end up impacting the maps in a way that's not helpful and not reaching the goal of having people in charge of politicians rather than politicians in charge of people. You can see situations, even if it's a totally bipartisan commission, if it is still those politicians, they might be negotiating with each other for their own self-interest. Like the Republicans and Democrats come together and they say, hey, this is how we can create a map that gives each of us like these safe districts. And we really want safe districts because we don't want to have to spend money in campaigning and persuading people that we're right. By contrast, if you have ordinary citizens in there, they don't have those sorts of background interests. And so you'll see better quality maps that reflect what people actually want. Also important, and something that can be a real benefit of some of these citizen-based commissions. People are able to apply from all over the state. You can have provisions in there that prioritize diversity, diversity of background, diversity of views, all sorts of things to try to help make sure that this body is as representative of the people as possible. Also on membership, and also it's come up a little bit, is there space for unaffiliated members? Or are you only going to have partisan members or people affiliated with the major political parties? In a state like North Carolina, it's really important to have representation for unaffiliated people because unaffiliated registrations are growing rapidly in this state. And we want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. Also, including unaffiliated members can help avoid some of the pitfalls and deadlocks that can come up if you only have people associated with the two major parties. So in Virginia, they have a bipartisan commission. It's split 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats. So they came to a map drawing process. And then eventually, as they were working through it, each side decided that they could get better from the courts than what they could get through the process. So they refused to come to any agreement on anything and kicked it to the courts. By contrast, if you have nonpartisan members, the commissions that have that had more agreement. They were able to reach more intergroup agreement overall on process and on the maps themselves. And in looking at, this is focusing specifically on the members of the commission, but it is also really important to think about the staff for the commission, their advisors, if they have an attorney that they're working with, the map drawers that they work with. You want to be looking at those people too to make sure that everyone is coming into this process with good intentions.
Excuse me, the General Assembly, does it vote the budget for these commissions? Where do they get their money?
So I'm not sure how all of the other ones have it set up, and I'm also not remembering for the North Carolina bill, do we have provisions in there specific about like requiring certain amounts of funding?
I would have to look back at it to confirm that with you, but I know that there are provisions that where it's required that it's funded.
In California, someplace else is funded like that?
Well, I meant in the North Carolina bill. I'm not exactly sure about the state.
I might be able to get back to you on the funding later. I'm not remembering offhand how they do that, but that is an important thing to consider because that's the sort of thing that would happen here. We would pass an independent redistricting commission and the legislature would say, okay, we're not giving you money. So trying to prevent that from happening is important too. Some other things that can end up creating legal issues with what a commission does is what kind of standards the commission has to follow. Because that's then the blueprint that people will look to and see, did the commission do what they're required to do? Did they ignore the things they're required to ignore? Did they follow the things they're required to follow? Or did they not? And if they did not, that's a place where people might step in with lawsuits saying, no, you were supposed to do this. You were supposed to disregard partisan data. But we know you use partisan data based on this evidence. And so you need to go back to the drawing board. Also, having steps in place in case the commission fails to act. Having fail-safes in case of a deadlock. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. I've put up an example on here on Arizona where their fail-safe is a little bit of double-edged sword. So their fail-safe really just comes down to having one independent on this 5-member commission. That member will serve as a tiebreaker generally and enable them to do something, enable them to pass maps. But it gives that one member a lot of outsized power compared to everybody else on the commission. And in practice, it has ended up casting doubt generally on that one independent member's true independence. Like, are they really nonpartisan? Or do they really lean one way or the other? So that's one way of doing it. Other deadlock situations, sometimes you have to go to the courts. We'll talk about another situation where it goes back to the legislature. But But there's lots of different options there, and it's just something that you need to plan for ahead of time rather than getting caught flat-footed later on. So an example of an IRC gone wrong is, in this particular situation, New York's IRC during this last redistricting cycle. The state constitution requires the legislature receive and vote on 2 sets of proposed maps from the state redistricting commission. So they have to receive and vote on 2 of those before they can adopt any map that wasn't drawn by the IRC. So it's like the IRC gets 2 chances to persuade the legislature, and if they fail, the legislature gets to go in there and make some changes. The IRC was hitting repeated partisan stalemates, both with the first map, where they each side sort of just sent up their own proposal rather than agreeing on one, which the state legislature shot down, and then they just didn't even submit a second proposal. Skipped that step entirely, just said, we're not doing it. And then the legislature promptly, 1 week later, passed their own maps. There was a lot of litigation over this, and ultimately the highest court in New York held that the maps were unconstitutional both for that failure to follow the process they were required to do. They didn't get that second map from the IRC, and also because the maps were partisan gerrymanders. So there was, for that particular election, there was a court-imposed map, but then the court said the commission needs to go back and propose another map for elections going forward. And it did so. The legislature, again, rejected it and proposed its own. So messages from this, the structure of the commission really matters. New York is one of the ones, they are advisory. They have these partisan members. They do have, I think it's 2 members on their commission who either are required to be independent or can be, but it wasn't enough to overcome the deadlock in this particular instance. So the structure really matters for getting it to actually do what it's supposed to do. And then also legislative involvement, whether it's the legislature getting to say, no, we don't like your plan, having legislators on a commission, things like that. They all make it harder for a commission to truly act as a nonpartisan body that's looking after the interests of the people. And I will pass it back to Rachel. Oh, okay, cool. So just to give like some background on why IRCs are so important, the courts have failed us. So in Rucho v. Common Cause, the Supreme Court held partisan gerrymandering is not something that can be dealt with in federal court. You can't sue on it. You can't get relief, no matter how bad it is. You can't bring partisan gerrymandering claim in federal court. And just recently, in 2023, reversing itself, the state Supreme Court held you can't bring a partisan gerrymandering claim in state court either. So if we want partisan gerrymandering addressed, we've got to take it into our own hands, and IRC is one of the ways of doing that. And then just also keeping in mind as well the increasing attacks on the Voting Rights Act and its protections for communities of color. Shelby County v. Holder got rid of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, stopped pre-clearance, which was how we kept an eye on and were able to intervene and prevent bad discriminatory laws and redistricting maps from being passed, like going into effect before they went into effect rather than having to deal with it after. And then now the Supreme Court is going to be rehearing a case on Louisiana redistricting where Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is under threat. So all of these things are reasons why we need to get control back.
Is that Louisiana case in state or federal court?
Federal court. It's before the U.S. Supreme Court this October.
Okay.
All right, and I think we're on to questions.
Well, thank you, Rachel, Adrian, Tyler, and Kyle. I do want to just give some space as we wrap up. If there's any additional questions that are in the room tonight, just feel free to ask those questions. And I'm going to check the chat just to see if there's any additional questions. I think we have a question here. Has anyone looked into the advisability of allowing a custom-made computer program to draw maps in order to eliminate human self-interest?
You go.
But I think the AI can be biased.
I was gonna say.
Because AI is created by people who are biased, who then create a biased machine. So, I don't think it's come up at all, that I've heard in other states, but yeah, it's a good tool, but it's biased.
What I would also say is, AI cannot tell you any interest. It can tell you what I guess, a municipality is, but you need people to tell you, okay, well, this is where, this is the community, it's that street that the cutoff line or whatever. You need people to tell you that. And that's why I would caution against having computers. It's a good thought, but, again, our focus is on, making sure that, and that's one of the key things, about the commission is communities of interest. Keeping communities of interest together, and making sure that you have districts that actually represent communities, not legislators.
And then another question was the bills that you mentioned, what is the possibility of those passing through the legislature?
I don't think that at this current time it is likely that we will see those bills move. But what I will say is, we do not know what the future holds. I think that many people may be surprised with how our politics has changed over the last decade. I know that in 2011 or 2010, I should say, it was a surprise to the Democrats when they were ousted at the General Assembly after they drew their gerrymandered districts and thought they would stay. So we don't know when those political stars will align, but we want to be prepared when it does. And who knows what happens in the 2026 elections? I will say, if we have one party controlling one chamber, another party controlling another chamber, that could create a situation where there is more incentive for them to work together.
And we need to be ready, right? I mean, that's a big part of it, right? We have to be ready for that moment. So we've written this up. So we're getting ready for that. And I really think the groundswell, you mentioned the groundswell earlier, Tyler, 89% of North Carolinians are tired of gerrymandering. And so it exists. We want to move this. And so the legislature, it may look far and away, but we know where the people are. And that's what we set ourselves.
Great. Well, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I don't believe there's any other questions in the room tonight. I do want to put everybody's contact information once again. Thank you to Common Cause, Tyler Day, NC Council Coalition, Cal Brazil, also Southern Coalition for Social Justice, Rachel, Allure, and Adrian Spoto. Also want to thank the Attorney Saskia Watkins for joining us tonight. Please, if you want to take a picture, I've also included Dr. Javita Lee. She's our policy director, very influential in standing up the Red Redistricting program across the state. Please, if you want to take a screenshot of all the contacts, I will send out a copy of the presentation tonight for all of our virtual attendees and our in-person attendees as well. And if you're virtual or if you're in the house tonight, this is a statewide program, and we do look to continue to move this information across the state. As I mentioned, we kick it off in Greensboro. We're in Rocky Mount tonight. And thank you to everybody that signed up on the sign-in list. So if you would like this information for us to take the Red Redistricting program to your county or to your city or to your town, or even partner with your organization to bring this content, because it is very important, as my partners mentioned, the proposed IRC bill. We see what's happening nationally. Please reach out to myself, Asani Mitchell, NC Black Alliance, .org. If you have any questions about the content tonight, feel free to reach out to our partners. That will conclude our Red Redistricting skill drawing the line. We want to thank everybody. We want to thank all of our online attendees, and we will send out a copy of this presentation shortly, but I want to thank everybody, and I hope everybody has a good night.
Now, please take some food.